Hey, it's Landon. Robbie's coming in on set here. I'm going to retweet the show. 1 second here. Oh, cat just jumped off my lap.
Hi, guys.
Going to retweet this here.
I'm going to have to scoot you over.
And going to retweet this on GrowUp account.
I'm scooting you over. There
All
we
right,
go.
1 second. Bear with us. We have
Hi,
a
guys.
really important conversation to have today.
This is an important one. I mean, this is a big deal right now, what's happening in America. This isn't new, but we'll wait for some more people to get on. But, I have to say that George Floyd video, it really bothered me. Ever since I watched it, it's popped in my mind quite a few times, If you haven't seen it, if you're able to watch something kind of graphic, I think you should watch it. There's something instructive about it because, I know during some of the very sort of controversial cases that have happened between police and civilians, there's been a lot of sort of like, it almost felt like it was a left versus right thing. And it's because, on the right, we have a tendency to want to always err on the side of law enforcement. And I don't think that that's, the worst thing in the world because, I would say in general, law enforcement is there to do their job. They're there to, keep us safer, to do the right thing. In general, that's the case. That's the truth. But, I think we have an opportunity around cases like this, like George Floyd, to sort of unify together with different communities and be able to say, hey, you know what? This is not okay. This is not human. This is not how we treat other people. It doesn't matter, the story goes back. This was allegedly a call about a nonviolent forgery that there's no evidence, there's still no evidence. In America, you're entitled to due process. That didn't happen. He didn't get due process. He died on the street. And I've heard some people say, they would have treated a dog better. And honestly, I do think they would have treated a dog better than he was treated. And I just can't shake that sort of humanity, that lack of humanity that he was treated with. And I think that, part of the problem with these issues is it's been framed so black versus white that a lot of people just shut off. They just shut off because, it feels, it's uncomfortable and it feels wrong, because so many of us know each other and we know, that our friends who are white or our friends who are black, they're not racist. They love each other, so it seems like it's a forced narrative that the media forces. And I do think the media does that. They intentionally sort of pick stories to build a divisive narrative around race. I think it's our job. The media is not going to do their job. So it's our job to reframe the conversation and say, hey, you know what? This isn't about race. This is about good versus bad. Okay. As people who want to see the right thing done, who want to see people treated well, we have to be able to call out bad things when they happen, whether they happen to Black people, white people, Asian people, Latino people, doesn't matter. We need to be able to call that out because that's how we're going to change the world in positive ways, and I think that it also does a disservice to good officers when we pretend there's not a problem at all. There's always a problem in every industry with there being a, 3 to 10% sort of, crappy person involvement. There's always going to be these bad people. And companies who don't root out those bad people, they have toxic cultures, so if we ignore individual cases like this or just sort of plug our ears, it's going to become more and more toxic, and this isn't just about this happening to Black people. That's the other thing, is this is something that, people like to sort of ignore the stats on this. More white people are killed by police than Black people in these scenarios. Washington Post keeps a very detailed, updated timeline of how many people are killed by police and what types of interactions. Did they have a weapon? Did they not have a weapon? What was the situation? They have a good sort of thing they keep up to date with on that. You look at that, more white people are actually killed than Black people. But so this isn't just a race thing. This isn't about, Black people are being hunted by police. That's not where I'm going with this, but there is a problem and we need to address the problem. And I think that, that's why we're here today. We want to talk about it.
So before I dive in, I just want to make sure, because there's the, this is people are saying that there's some like glitching going out. So if that does happen, please comment and let us know, because we might just switch the format altogether, because it's really irritating. I know when you guys, your time is precious and it glitches out. Like, I get how irritating that is.
And maybe an individual issue, somebody.
Right. So please let us know. That would help us with this process, because if this format isn't working, then we'll switch it up so it's more enjoyable. I do want to say, if I sound sick, it's because I am. I do not have COVID. I have bronchitis, and I did get tested for COVID. So if I am, sounding like weird or just aren't my sharpest self, that is why.
That's why.
So, anyway, so yeah,
this
going back
video
into
felt different though.
Right. This video, I mean, it was just, it was awful. It was very awful to watch. And, this isn't the first time this has happened. It's not like we're reacting differently to this one. There's been horrible videos that we've seen of unjust
all races.
Police brutality, yes, of all races. But it's important, people aren't really making videos of white people, because who wants to post something and be like, police brutality against whites? Nobody's going to do that.
It's not
it's not, something that's happening. And they are, altercations when, race is involved, particularly if it's a Black person. There are more videos being taken, and I understand why. There's
a heightened awareness.
There's a heightened, awareness to this being an issue. There are genuine feelings of being scared for their safety. We listen. There's a lot of, Black people that feel this way, and then they, hear the mainstream media just constantly regurgitate the same stories, and it perpetuates a narrative that incites fear in people. Just like with anything, they're not just doing it. They're not just targeting, Black people and trying to make them scared. It's with everything in news. It's with the virus. It's with everything.
It builds an all or nothing mentality too.
And that's the thing, and that's really the biggest thing that we're seeing. And I bring this up all the time. It's this black and white polarized thinking, completely, missing any nuance. Because here's the thing. When you bring up, especially as a white person, when you bring up any nuance saying, hey, to begin with, people should stop resisting arrest and start respecting the police more, so that they don't end in these more, excessive violent confrontations. Even if you bring that point up, people feel like you're negating what happened.
Yeah, and we're not saying that's the case with George Floyd.
No. I'm not talking about
this is just a general thing. Like,
I'm talking about in general, because there's so many videos that when you actually look at the full context, most of them involve some sort of arrest,
there being an altercation,
some kind of violence. And I'm saying, I'm bringing that up because that does perpetuate a greater risk to people when you resist arrest. That is going to automatically put you at greater risk for an escalation scenario that nobody wants for anybody of any race. And I think that needs to be talked about, because if there is a lack of respect for law and the process, then none of us are going to be safe in any context. We need our law enforcement officers, and we need them to do their job, and we need to help them do their job effectively. So, and here's what I'm going to say with that. If they're wrongfully arresting you and they don't have a warrant and they're doing things, wrong, sue the hell out of them. There should be better resources for people who don't have financial resources to hold the people accountable for profiling, for wrongful arrest, for, excessive use of force, things like that, exist, where it's not necessary,
Those things exist, but I do think that, I think it's how we frame this whole conversation. Like, I think that's where so much of this has come from, is there's been sort of this assumption, this all or nothing thinking that you're either one side or the other. And the truth is, like, the George Floyd case is not complicated. He was killed. He should not have been killed.
Yeah, should not have been killed.
The conversation on an overall scale is complicated, because you can, on one hand, say, hey, you know what? I support law enforcement. I know a lot of these people. They're great people. They just want to come home to their family at the end of the day, and they want to help make the world a safer place. I have massive respect for what they do. I mean, just watch an episode of Live PD and look at just like a day of what a lot of officers put up with. It's pretty crazy.
Right.
So I think that there's sort of this all or nothing thing of you either have to be against them or for them or whatever. And that's just not a rational way to think about this.
No.
The rational way to go about this is to say, hey, yes, there is a problem, just like there is in any industry. You can't ignore the problem when there is one. If you do, it's going to get worse. It's going to fester into something really nasty and ugly beyond what it already is. And so we're at that place where we have to kind of all link together, and we have an opportunity to sort of unify behind this case and say, hey, what happened to him is not okay. And that can be something that spurs positive change, where you can say, hey, we can have reforms that make police safer and civilians safer. You know, and there's been a conversation, at least on the right, that I've been encouraged by for a long time about the militarization of police. That's something that, you know, we should not want. We shouldn't want our police to look like an occupying force. We should want, you know, our police to feel like they're members of our community, that when, you know, our kids look at them, they look up to them. And that's, you know, one of the things I love is, you know, the police where we live, they are like that. They're very much like, when our kids see them, they're like, oh, cool, it's the police, you know, like, and they want to see them, you know, and I think that's a healthy thing. That's how it should be, but that's not how it is everywhere. There's a lot of places where that's not the case. And it's, you know, in part cases like this, in part, you know, the militarization. And I think that, you know, we have to, if we just ignore sort of, let me go back. Okay, so part of the thing you'll hear is you'll see some people and they'll say that, you know, they'll say some really nasty things about police. I don't even want to repeat them, but you know what they are. When you see that, a lot of people either they take the route of, I want to fight with you and argue with you about it, or I'm going to ignore you, you're hateful. I think that strategy is a bad one. I think we need to have conversations, and we need to say, like, okay, let's look at this rationally. If you're willing to have a conversation, I want to talk about it, because I understand where a lot of these people are coming from. They're watching people who look like them die in really brutal ways. If they watch the George Floyd video, they watched a guy die being treated worse than an animal. Worse, I mean, he was treated like scum.
Right. And that protocol needs to change. That protocol was not what good law enforcement officers should do. And they should be trained with an emphasis in de-escalation, not enforcement.
Yeah. And
the mentality that they need to force everything could be the problem. And yes, there's things that should be changed within these individual institutions. Like, that's the thing, is it needs to be called out. You know, the individuals, when we talk and we blame like a whole, you know, group of people, like it's a racist fault, or it's the police's fault. We take the responsibility away from the people that perpetrated the crime. We need to put the responsibility on the individuals that were part of that, including the officers that were complicit and the policies that allowed them to be complicit, and put that pressure on those police
on those
forces
to change,
in that particular area. For instance, Minnesota.
Minneapolis specifically has had a problem. You know, you had the Philando Castile happen there. You had I forget her name. There was the Australian lady who was killed, and she was killed by. He was, I think, the first Muslim officer in Minneapolis. There was he had actually had like a little bit of celebrity before this had happened, because he was the first one from that community to become an officer there. They've had serious policing issues. And so they need to take a look at their training and figure out if there's something at the root of this in the vetting process or in the training process. But you look at the video, one of the things that was concerning to me is that, you know, it looked like the officer, if you watch the George Floyd video, it looks like he reapplies pressure with his knee on the guy's throat, on the back of his neck, when the crowd is starting to the people watching and filming are getting a little bit angry with him. It was
a power struggle, and he was abusing his power.
He was reacting to the people that were filming and taking out his frustration on them, on the person that he was with. Right. That's what it felt like. Every time they said, hey, you know, I forget the exact words they said, but something to the effect of wanting him to stop, he can't breathe, whatever it is. He reapplied pressure even harder with his knee. You know, the whole thing was sick. It's, you know, it's one thing to have a bad day and for a police officer to be in an altercation and for the adrenaline to get like the most of them, and they maybe get a little too crazy, you know, in that moment. If they didn't start the altercation, I mean, like there's weird blurred lines there, because I think everybody can understand somebody like if you're a police officer, you show up to a call, it's a domestic abuse call, and you see this guy who just beat his kid and his wife, and then he tries to attack you, and you're in an altercation with him, I can understand a little bit of that adrenaline and cortisol that runs through, resulting in the fight maybe going on a little bit longer than it should have. That's a very different situation. And I think that's the type of stuff people kind of like muddy into all this. And the truth is, it's a lot like politics in terms of what's toxic about it is we generalize so much about one situation being the truth of the norm. So if you find one racist person, you say, oh, all these people are racist. That's the most unhealthy, toxic thing we can do. If we actually want to solve problems, the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we don't generalize. We have to individually go after each issue, each case, and look at what would have changed this, what would have prevented this from happening.
Let's look at the statistics and look at these hot pocket areas of where what you perceive to be race motivated crimes or race tension is based on the statistics, and really dive in and see, is there a problem? Is there a top to bottom down problem in this police enforcement agency here or area here? Because if you look at this, there's so many counties in our country that do not have blacks being gunned down, white being gunned down. They have maybe 2 unintentional controversial shootings a year where the police had to use deadly force.
And then you look into those controversial.
Right. Well, but I mean, like, where once you dig in and you see what happened and the resisting of arrest, and it was an you do the research, you look at the context, and then you understand what happened.
This is actually part of the problem. Is I think that there's been a lot of cases where you've seen social media go crazy about something happening to somebody, and on that piece of video, you see 15 seconds, and in those 15 seconds, it looks really bad. And then 24 hours later, a video that's 2 minutes long comes out, and you see it from a different angle, and you see that the person who was shot reached for the officer's gun, and then you go, okay, I understand now. And that's another thing is people sort of jump on things. But in the case of George Floyd, that's not the case. Like the video footage from multiple angles is there. There was no reason for him to die.
No.
He was entitled to due process for whatever crime he was being accused of, and he didn't get it. So I think that, we have to be consistent and not run away from the conversation just because there's some, uncomfortable things around it, and part of that is the overarching thing here is racism in America. If you've known us for a long time, I'm not afraid to talk about race. I don't believe we have in this toxic racism problem in America. I believe that there are individuals who are racist, and I believe that, that's why I'm such a big proponent of why I support free speech. I want to hear what people are saying because it allows me the opportunity to stay away from people who are truly racist. It allows us all to sort of use our pocketbooks, our behaviors to be able to exclude people who are going to be, primitive in the way they treat people. I don't believe we have a major racism problem in America, though. This is something that happens on these isolated cases, and people ignoring it, I think, can lead to a racism problem.
If this was a true systemic police issue, we would see this happening every day in every area of America. We're not. We're seeing it happen in the same hot pockets of crime area. And
what's interesting is a lot of times in democratic cities. A lot of these cases are happening in democratic cities.
Look at Chicago. It happens every weekend. The media doesn't, cover these shootings.
That's another part of
this.
They
don't cover self-defense shootings. They don't cover any of this
They had
stuff.
almost, I think it was close to a record amount over the last weekend of shootings. It was something like 40-something shootings in Chicago over this last week. It was a crazy amount. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember seeing it was, approaching a record amount. And media, they didn't really touch it. They didn't touch the story. It's not breaking news. It's not, it doesn't go anywhere. George Floyd is breaking news, and it is everywhere. And, I think both should be, because both situations matter, and both present an opportunity for us to fix something that's broken, so I think that the Black lives in Chicago that were taken over the last weekend, mostly gang violence related, I think they matter. And I think that George Floyd's life matters. I also believe that the police officers' lives matter that, are attacked on a daily basis while doing their job. I also think that, so
that risk their lives every day.
This is the other thing
is
all lives matter turns into this toxic thing where people say, oh, well, all lives aren't being attacked. Well, if you look at the numbers, anybody can be a victim of police brutality. Anybody can be a victim of a police shooting. They're exceptionally rare. If you look at the numbers, the amount of interactions police have on a daily basis and the number that turn bad, it's actually extraordinarily low how often this occurs. But that doesn't mean that we can ignore it and say, oh, let's move on. This happens. It's, a sad byproduct of, just humanity. We can always try to be better. And I think that's what we need to reframe this is how can we be better?
Right.
Because something failed here. And I'm not, so self-important that I think I know all the things that failed, but I have a good idea of what I think failed. And I think their training was insufficient. I think that the man who actually did it was lacking in empathy and a soul to be able to be in that position of power. I think that the vetting failed on giving him his job, or if the vetting didn't fail, the continual sort of check-in on, hey, how are you doing to officers, like seeing where our officers are at, because they go through a lot on a daily basis. And you can have some sort of mental illness happen that, somebody starts to lose their ability to sort of be empathetic in these situations, or be just sort of, capable of common sense to be like, hey, you know what, let up on the knee. I think that those things are clearly lacking here, and there's clear, easy things we can do to fix those things. But to be able to do that, we have to have the conversation. We have to talk about it. And I think, so I would just love to see, and I've been seeing it to a certain extent, but even more so, a lot of Republicans just feel comfortable having the conversation, and saying, hey, yes, this is bad.
Yeah, I think that's where we need to meet. And the more specific we can get on any issue, the closer we come together to actually solving a problem.
Yeah.
When we hang out here and start saying it's systemic racism and no, it's, we need to be kind to our police officers, like then we're just floating in the air and we're not dealing in absolutes. We need to come together and to the point of where the problem occurred and solve things one by one. If there's a problem, where they're hiring, consistently people that are abusing their power in certain police academies, or if they have a policy where there's, enabling going on by fellow officers rather than a policy of, hey, I'm seeing this not go well, when, we need to change roles here. There should be policies there for de-escalation situations when one officer is having to use excessive force for a prolonged period of time to subdue a person, but in this case, the specific case, because I just, I didn't know we were going to start on that one, and I don't want to be insensitive to that because that's not the whole conversation today. But I do want to be very clear. What happened to George was horrible, and my first instinct as a conservative Republican woman was to tweet out how horrible it was, how unjust it was, and that he was killed. I didn't make excuses for it. I didn't say, well, but everybody should still love police officers. I didn't say that. That was my first reaction. So I think context matters because a lot of people get upset when we start having a broader conversation about is there a systemic racism problem within America, and then is there even in police, the police force? Like we need to. That doesn't negate what happened to George or negate any of these horrible in situations that have happened. Yeah. We're not negating that they happen, and we're not minimizing it. And when people bring that point up, you have to understand, like, it doesn't, just because you're having a conversation doesn't mean you don't care about the person involved. It's that we're trying to find a solution, and blaming, taking something like this and saying, oh, it's racism. We have a racism problem and we need to stop it. Okay. What's the next action? And then what? We just need to, police need to, come out and stop being so racist. Okay, what does that look like? They cannot give you a specific example. And so if they want to take activism, whoever it is, the real activism should be in holding these individuals accountable. Go protest outside. If they're not making the arrest in an appropriate amount of time for something that is so obviously unjust to you, Go protest outside of that.
This is the other side of it, though. Is that I don't know if you saw this. They had a riot. There was a horrible
rioting
riot.
Doesn't solve anything.
They destroyed police cars. They did all kinds of stuff. It was terrible.
But that's not activism. That's destruction. That's violence begetting more violence.
Exactly, and that's the problem we've seen after these cases is like there's sort of this like pent up frustration, anger, grieving, whatever it is. And it's coming out in these ways that are, number one, unlawful, number two, counterproductive, number three, they're actually impeding justice because you're using all these resources that then have to be on top of this versus being on top of whatever this issue is. In the case, somebody asked, does this set a bad precedent that they fired all 4 officers that were involved? No, it doesn't. Because the other 3 officers, they actually, had a rule that was put in place a while ago there that the other officers should have intervened. They should have intervened at that point, and they didn't intervene. And maybe
that was due to a protocol. Maybe they wanted to, but there's a protocol.
No, it's not. No, they have the rule there that the other officers were supposed to intervene and they didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, then absolutely. So then what you're saying is there isn't a problem with that specific protocol.
Yeah. Maybe there is a problem with it because it didn't work.
Maybe I would love to hear from a police officer.
I think that maybe there needs to be a very clear system of intervening where an officer can sort of like, maybe it's even a word, like saying a specific word that kind of takes somebody's head out of it and they change. Or maybe it's that, hey, if you have a suspect on the ground this long while you're waiting for EMS, you have to trade positions every, 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever, These are the types of things that police officers need to sit down and talk about, not me. They need to sit down and have these talks with other people that are smarter than I am about this issue and come up with what is the way that we can be safer and citizens can feel safer and know that there's some sort of check and balance here. That's what I'm saying is there's things we can do to be better, and we shouldn't be afraid of doing them or talking about them because, doing better should ultimately be our goal in every facet of our country. And whenever you have a group of people that is feeling the way that our Black community in America is feeling, seeing these things, and it's not just this, it's seeing the Central Park thing, and seeing, this new case where this guy was, he was you didn't see this yet, but the guy told these young Black men in the gym that, why are you here? Like, you don't belong here type of thing. And they work in the same office building. They have key cards. They're entitled to use the gym. The guy was just, there's no other excuse except for he was basing this off the way they look. I think the more people see things like this, you can't just ignore that there's a problem. There is a problem. And we have to be able to have a conversation about it. And I think the more we meet in the middle to have the conversation about like, hey, what can be done in ways that are going to be productive for everybody involved, because rioting and breaking stores and burning police cars, whatever it is that we've seen happen in the past, none of it's productive. It fuels more of the you versus me, Black versus white sort of mentality that is just toxic. Absolutely toxic, goes nowhere except for making it worse. It actually fuels this type of thing. And so that's what I would like to see. Looking at de-escalation workshops, that's something you talked about a lot.
Yeah, and also the protocol, anytime somebody has an impaired airway, clearly impaired airway and is having trouble breathing, there needs to be a different way of restraining them, putting them where their chest is being compressed and it's harder for their lungs to expand, and turning their neck so that their airways turn like this just is nonsensical, and it's dangerous, and it's a liability issue for the police officers, which can be sued, individually for their role in this, and the families should absolutely pursue that.
I'm sure they will. They already have a lawyer.
That's the thing we can get behind. I can get behind that. I'll retweet that. I'll do whatever it takes to actually help bring justice to the individual scenarios. What I'm not going to do is participate in a mainstream media narrative that all police are bad, that they're all racist, because there's so many Black police officers, so many Hispanic police officers, so many Asian police officers. If there was a racist place to work every day, I'm sure, you know.
I'm sorry, this isn't funny. I know I'm on the verge of our cat's acting like a nut job right now.
I don't know why.
She's in here and she's
jumping from all the
she's never done this
cables
before.
and cords. I don't know
acting
what's
like
going
a
on.
lunatic. So it may look inappropriate, but I'm not smiling about what she's talking about.
You might be able to hear her.
So
that's what really frustrates me. And here's the thing. I understand where it frustrates, you know, certain people who are having this fear or who see things in a different way and see this and go, I've been watching a video a day from, you know, media going viral. And by the way, media is behind viral videos. They don't just go viral organically. You know, journalists are very rarely. But you can almost always trace it back to a journal. They have narratives, and that's always important to keep in mind for everybody's sake, because it can really result in dangerous scenarios, especially one where they're, you know, inciting like race wars. And
there's a reason why we've seen
reporting
6 this week or whatever it is, and we didn't for, you know, most of the last few years. You know, you'd see an odd one here or there. It's not like these things didn't exist; they existed, but the media is pushing them, you know, because this fuels something for them, and that division fuels, and it happened. And same thing. It happened in 2016 too. Same thing. They did the same thing in 2016. So these things are things we need to be cognizant of, and the more we have sort of a lack of fear of addressing it, having the conversation fact-based, and be reasonable when people, when in a case like this where a George Floyd, what happened to him happens, we need to be right there and say, this is wrong. This is not acceptable. This needs, like, justice needs to be done here. You know, somebody asked, it's Life Love AR said, could it be too quick to assume racism? Absolutely. Absolutely too soon to assume racism in the case of George Floyd. We have this is my criticism of the media, is that, you know, they dive straight into white cop kills black man. A human killed a human here. We have no reason yet to assume that this was racially motivated at all. There were other races of officers there who did not intervene. That it's definitely not, you know, we're not able to clearly assume this was race motivated at all. So if anybody was confused by the description here, talking about racism in America, that was not associated with the George Floyd case. That was just, I want to address, because a lot of people conflate this with racism in America, when in reality, I feel like there's a very small group of people who are actually, like, you know, gigantic racists who on a daily basis are, you know, enacting sort of these biases on other people. I just don't see that. I don't experience it. I haven't seen it. And I've looked for it. I've looked for it. I want to understand. I think that's one of the things that sort of, if I had to say a good quality about me, is I want to understand things. I'm very curious, you know? And so when I see something like this and I see that there's people aggrieved, I see that there's a problem, you know, I'll look and I'll see, like, how widespread is this? I'll talk to my friends who have different experiences than I do. And I'll talk, you know, sort of run the game.
And it's not all black people, by the way, that feel, you know, like they're scared to walk in a hoodie, or, you know, it's not. That's the hard part, is if every one of them felt that way, we would really need to do you know, I don't know. It would be more of a problem. It would be even more of a problem,
but it's not. I have like talking about race at all. I've talked to so many of my friends who are black, and I want to know what their experiences are. How have you experienced racism? You know, like, what? It's instructive, I think, for people, because racism does still exist. It's just not. It's not the prevalent sort of thing that I think the media would want people to believe, and but it is there, so we can't just ignore that it's not there. It's there. It exists
against every race too.
Exactly.
And that's important,
because it does.
And here's why having, you know, empathy can be a little tricky. Empathy generally, you know, is inspired in us when we personally feel, you know, related or affected to, you know, the issue in some way. You know, there's exceptions, but, you know, so we're you know, just naturally biased creatures. If we know somebody, or, you know, that has had this certain experience, it becomes more real. Therefore, we are more interested in it, more protective of it, and, you know, and all of that. And we should always encourage each other to get out of that bubble and have empathy for people we don't relate to, don't know, things like that. But, empathy itself can be biased. And when we just entertain the viral stuff that happens with one group and it's labeled as such and it's marketed as such, we're negating the experience of other people too that experience the same discrimination. Asian Americans, Jewish Americans, we're all Americans. So it's important not to hyperfixate on any one group and instead call out the individual act wherever the injustice is happening, wherever the racism is happening, however it is happening. Okay? There's the illusion that we have to decide, there's two news stories. Which one do I tweet about? The white person gunned down unjustly or the black person? Probably the black person. That's about that's about virtue signaling, essentially. Is like, no, this matters more.
Well,
they all matter.
Yeah.
So if it comes out and you see it, say something. If it's against a Jewish American, a rabbi, or whatever,
I think on a local level, people need to do that where they push it out there and tell other people that, hey, this happened here, because I think that helps instruct the conversation on a larger scale. We don't tend to do that, though. The media doesn't do that, and it's very difficult. It's never going to be sort of an accurate depiction of America, and I think that's something a lot of people have to come to terms with, is that that's just not how the media works. And so we have to do the work to have the conversation that's rational and accurate, that says, hey, whether the person this happened to was black, white, Asian, Latino, doesn't really matter. What happened to this human being is what matters. And how do we prevent that from happening to another human being? Because if we don't have that conversation, it could happen to me or you or anybody. Somebody said, EMTB course is less than 4 months. Integrate this training with law enforcement training and de-escalation.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great idea.
Very common sense.
I think that's a great idea.
These are solutions that we can all get behind. Why wouldn't we want that for our law enforcement officers?
Somebody else said, how would other cops defend this? I've talked to a bunch of my police friends. Not one has defended it.
And
not
one
has defended it. Every single police officer I have spoken to since I saw the video yesterday, and I reached out to multiple, every single one has said this was murder.
Right.
They didn't apply their training. He reapplied pressure in a vindictive way that had nothing to do with the guy on the ground. It had to do with the crowd. That was what I saw too. There are multiple issues here, and that the other officers should have intervened. So that's one. I think that we're going to be hard pressed to find. I'm sure somebody will find a police officer who will defend this, but I think that will be a very minimal number of people who would defend this. I think the vast majority of police officers are great people doing a really, really hard job. And, there's no defense for this. And I think they all they're humans like us. They're not robots. Police aren't robots who wake up with their shield on and, their gun on their side. They're human beings. And at the end of the day, they watch this video too. A lot of police officers are black. They watch this video too. And to all of them, this is wrong as well. Like, they see just an unjust act towards a human being. So that's something I wanted to address. Another person said, this is fueled by the media's Smollett tactics. There's definitely so if we're being intellectually honest, where this story comes from is definitely driven by a media narrative. But we addressed that earlier. There's definitely an incentive for the media to push narratives that are racially divisive in both directions, So with, the nursing home case, I saw a lot of people making that about race. The one that happened in Detroit where the old white man was beaten up by the guy who was, I don't know if he was black, but he was a person of color, whatever he was, whatever his background. But a lot of people were going with the race narrative with that. Same thing with this. I'm so sick of the race narrative being the crux of this. I think
that's the knee-jerk reaction, and that's
knee-jerk.
Dangerous.
And in some cases, it's right. That's the thing. Is in some cases, it's right. Like in the case of that nursing home, the guy did end up later on. They found evidence that he was a racist. And so, if we find the same thing with this officer after there's been some investigation, some facts, and we find that he was a racist, then you look at the story maybe a little differently. But I think people are too soon to knee-jerk into that it has to be a racially sort of motivated context to all of this. And the media loves to push things that go in that direction because, number one, they fuel ratings. People get have to pick a side is what it feels like. And people want to know the facts, understand what happened because it becomes viral and whatever. And so the media benefits out of it. So that's why they do this stuff, but it also serves their political purposes.
They race bait, they do. And that, again, it discredits the real racism that happens when it happens. Because when you put out a story it involves two races, but there isn't any racial component to it. It wasn't a motivated racial crime and there's no evidence as such. And you put out a story that says that, you discredit the real ones that come along where race is involved. You desensitize people to that experience, and people are less emotive because they're like, oh, they're doing the same thing again. So, media needs to be responsible, and people should hold them accountable too for their part in sensationalizing and race baiting things that are not always a race issue. Just because there are two different races, or white and black, does not mean that it's an issue. What's up?
All right, you guys ready? We're gonna bring Denisha on.
Oh, Denisha.
Denisha Carter. She's a YouTuber, a singer-songwriter, sometimes political commentator.
Hey, Denisha.
And she is jumping on with us. We're going to talk about this, but we're also going to talk about the Nevada shutdown that is still happening.
Right.
So I'm trying to get this to look all beautiful. We'll try it this way and see if we can see everybody.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Now we can see.
Hopefully
all right. So how are you today, Denisha?
I'm well. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Doing okay.
I'm gonna have to come over here on you. So okay, we were talking. I don't know if you were listening. We were talking about the George Floyd case and just in general, racism in America and the conversation around it. And that sort of one of the things with the George Floyd case that we're seeing is that I think it's taken a lot of people off the sidelines who have wanted to avoid having a conversation because the video is so visceral. It's so clear that he was killed. And the way we frame these conversations in the past has always been this: it has to be a black versus white mentality versus a good versus bad mentality. And that I think we can actually get a lot more done to fix it by having a good versus bad mentality instead of a white versus black mentality.
Yeah, I agree. I think the media pushes out the stories so quickly and everybody gets very emotional because they see something as graphic as that and they immediately pick a side. And once it's gone out like that, it's very hard to reel people back in and say, let's take another look at this, because once you say that, it sounds like you're attempting to justify what happened, and that's not necessarily the case. I know for me, I was seeing a whole bunch of different conversations around the situation where no one was intentionally denying that what we saw was horrific. It was people trying to say, what is really happening here? We saw a very short video at first. That was, of course, the most gruesome portion of the video. And now everybody hates each other. Everybody's screaming. Everybody's rioting. And we've gone nowhere. And so I think, like you guys were saying, we have to be able to take this conversation back to a base level where we say, okay, let's get the magnifying glass. Let's figure out what actually occurred, who was involved, what motivation caused this, because I think that a human life is the highest price you should pay in this country. And regardless of who is taking it or why, if that is to happen, you need to be able to prove that it was the only necessary action you could take. And that's how we should be looking at this, not necessarily as, because of the two skin colors present, we clearly know this is why it happened, let's go out for blood.
I mean, we even see there's already fake Photoshop pictures up that, like, ICE put out a fake Photoshop picture of who's supposed to be the cop wearing an all whites matter hat, and it's fake. It's somebody Photoshopped it,
It's
and that's, they're driving this into. Is that the cat?
I don't know what that is.
Can you hear it?
I can hear it, but only when you're speaking. Is it happening when I'm speaking too?
No, it wasn't happening when you were
that's
speaking.
not here.
Maybe it's
That's weird.
my microphone.
No, sorry.
Is it yours?
That's
Yeah, I think it's my mic.
hold on.
Let me see.
No. Okay, sorry, Denisha.
No, you're good.
It might be
Hold on.
very strange.
That's bizarre.
I think it's.
Just turn off your mic. See. Okay. So. Nope, it's still going on.
It sounds like typing.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like a. Do you hear it?
Yeah. I don't know what it is. It sounds like something's like shorting out almost.
That's so weird. It might be stream. We've had a couple issues with this stream thing.
That is so weird.
Very strange. It's
okay. Well, let's continue.
Yeah,
I
we'll
want to hear
just
it just to
continue.
say. Okay, sorry if it's too distracting.
That's so weird.
I'll try to fix it. You
Sorry,
guys talk.
Denisha. So please continue with what you're saying.
Just basically, I agree. I think we need to be able to shape the narrative where we do look at these situations as a bigger picture of what could actually be happening here before we jump to the conclusion that it's a race situation. It might be, but we need to take the time to figure that out for sure. Because again, if people are going to be losing their lives, everybody should want an answer as to why.
Absolutely. How do we approach this conversation with people that feel very you're having, wanting to have that broader conversation that somehow it's negating, that mentality of like, well, you're just trying to, distract from what happened. What do they want us to do and say for them to feel like we also care? I'm not really sure what, else to say with these conversations.
I think a big part of it is people wanting to be heard. And I actually think this is one thing that I really like about following you and Robbie, because I don't see this as often in other people. It's when I follow people who are conservative or when I follow people who are liberal or democratic, they play to a certain side. So they avoid talking about certain topics or saying certain things that could even be misconstrued as if they weren't 100% for their team. And what you and Robbie tend to do consistently is make it very clear that you've seen the problem here. Like, you came out and said, we don't agree with this. This is a problem. This is someone being killed and it's not acceptable. And I feel like once you start with that point, it then allows you to be able to say, can we look at this bigger picture? Whereas the opposite end is you have people who come out and are just like, well, something must have happened. Something must have provoked this. Something must have done da 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 da. And how that translates is, so you're justifying that because this person did X, Y, or Z, they deserve to be choked to death. And that's not going to be receptive.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's very well said, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very well said. You know what I was going to recommend? Do you have headphones?
Me? Yes.
I think it might be feedback from your computer.
Oh, that could be. Actually, is there a way to kick me out and then I can jump back in from my laptop instead of my cell phone?
Yes, I'll kick you out and you can jump back on the other one.
Okay, let's switch it up and see if that fixes it.
I'm going to check y'all's comments here.
So basically, we're going to continue with Denisha, but I know you can't see me, but you guys can hear me right now. But, I think that it's an important conversation to have, for the multitude of reasons we've named. But I think Denisha was onto something there in terms of the fact that, just by purely saying something, you're letting the other side know that you see and hear them, and that this isn't just something that's being ignored, that this is like everybody's able to recognize this is an injustice. That allows us to then move on to a conversation that says, hey, now let's look at this broader picture in a different context, in a different way. And let's be very careful and fact-oriented. But I think you can actually cool down a lot of tensions, a lot of, anger and sort of the visceral, grievous reactions that we see by just saying, I see you, I hear you. And yes, there's an injustice here. That doesn't need to assign race as the prime motivator of whatever that injustice is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where, there's a disconnect too, is we come out and we say, this is awful, this is horrible. How can we stop this? How can we keep it from happening? And the idea of how to keep it from happening is just different. On one hand, we have people saying, well, this is a system problem and it's a white supremacy problem. It dates back to Europeans and white privilege and all this, which doesn't ever get to an actual point of action. And that's where the disconnect happens. And then you have people on the other side saying, hold the officers accountable, go down there, protest outside, demand a response from the head of the department, put that pressure on, do a GoFundMe for the families, sue these individual officers, sue the police station. I mean, do whatever you can to get justice, because we agree justice should be served. But, there's just a fundamental disconnect as to how we prevent things like this from happening. And I understand where people who have a different opinion, I understand where they're coming from. They're looking for this root cause, as to how to weed out racism from ever happening, or, but again, certain situations are not always racially motivated. And the ones that are a very small minority of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of police, civilian exchanges that are peaceful and productive, that happen every single day, that keep our lives safe and better and help us live in a civil society. And to just negate those facts because they're inconvenient or don't, support the outrage that we feel emotionally, they don't validate that emotional experience, that presents a conflict. And so, it's a complicated conversation. And I think that it's important for both sides to be heard. And I also think that it's important for all races to have this conversation and not just stop talking about it because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So, I think that's really important. Where's Denisha? We lost her.
She's coming back on. So we have some good comments here. We're going through your guys' questions right now. Here's Denisha. She's popping back on. Can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, and there's no more keyboard. So it was your thing. So okay, we've never had that. That's a new issue that we'll need to be aware of for the future, as people may need to wear headphones.
So here we go.
Somebody asked if they can do call in and talk to us. We do that sometimes. We weren't planning on doing that today. It's a kind of a pain in the butt. We'll do it.
We can do it, just not right now. I mean, now I want to hear what Denisha has to say.
Exactly. There's somebody, trying to speak for her instead of letting her speak herself. So we'll let Denisha speak for herself.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, sweet. The one thing that I did find interesting, or that I like that you said, Landon, is you were like, these are things people can sue for. And I was like, she's speaking my language, because when I see a video like that, the first thing I'm thinking is lawsuit immediately. But it's a very emotion-driven conversation. And I think it does start with making it clear that you hear people and you're not justifying this by any means. You're just saying, we want to be able to come down hard on this if this is a serious situation, want to know how we can fix it. And I think we do kind of need to set a precedent of looking into any type of escalation, any type of imbalance of power, any situation that gets to a point where it's that tense, or when someone gets killed, and make it very clear that this isn't going to be something that we either write off or just get upset about for a couple hours and then let it go.
Yep. And I think people need to think really rationally about this. How do we get there to that place? It's not going to be by saying, hey, this is a black versus white thing. It's going to be by saying, hey, imbalances in power affect everyone. So anytime there's, an injustice, we need to be able to say, hey, we have a system that's able to look at this and get to the root of why it occurred. And if we don't do that, and we just stick with this whole white versus black narrative, we're never going to get anywhere. We're going to have the same thing happen. We're going to have riots 20 years from now because of an isolated case that we still don't know the facts about. And I think that's the issue, is that you were so right on about just seeing and hearing people. If we just let people know they're seen and heard, then you can have a conversation. I understand why some people are grieving over this. I've thought about the video over and over. It's affected me more than other videos I've seen, because you can feel his humanity, throughout the whole clip. And it's so clear from the video angles. There's multiple video angles. It's just so clear that there was no reason for him to die. None. There was no reason for, you could even argue there was no reason for him to be on the ground, in that situation right there. But just focusing on the death, there was no reason for him to die. Mm-hmm. And he did. So the more people can just acknowledge that, then we can move on to a conversation about, hey, but let's not say this is race motivated when we don't have the facts to be able to back that up yet. Let's focus on how could this have not occurred, you know, and sort of work our way backwards from there to examine what would have stopped this, you know?
And I think the awareness has to come from both sides as well. As much as people need to say, we don't justify this, we see where you're coming from. People on the other end too need to take a second and recognize how many people are upset about this. So many people who aren't Black are talking about how this is a problem. So many people are outraged who aren't Black. So it makes it very clear that this isn't a mass motivation of everybody in America that's white being racist and working together to kill this man. As I'm watching the Twitter feed, I'm like, these are people who have platforms, who have a voice, speaking out about this when they technically don't have to and easily couldn't. So that's part of it as well. Look at these people before you say everyone is racist, everyone's an enemy. A lot of these people are on your side. A lot of people are mad about this.
Yeah, and the more you kind of go in that direction of like it's every white person is this or every Black person is that just fuels racism. And it kind of boggles my mind that there's still so many people on both sides who don't see that the more we do that type of stuff, number one, it's ignorant. Number two, it's not productive. And I think that's the thing that just boggles my mind the most is haven't we done this long enough to realize that we're not getting anywhere doing that? You know, we can just talk to each other and say, yes, this guy did not deserve to die. Let's fix it. You know, and I do think there's a byproduct that nobody's talking about in terms of how conservatives are kind of, I think, treating this case differently than maybe some in the past where there's been some sort of, I guess they were more controversial. You know, you'd see one angle and then you'd see another angle later, or a minute was cut out and you see, oh, they did reach for their gun or whatever it is. And those things sort of muddied the water. But one of the things I think changed here is during this lockdown, a lot of people saw very overzealous enforcement of what a lot of people would say are unconstitutional sort of grabs of power. And I think the people who saw that had to rethink their own sort of blind trust of all law enforcement. And I think that is both, you know, it can be good and bad, because you could argue there's a negative to the effect of, like, you know, just the safety of police. But on the flip side, you can argue there's a positive in questioning everything, you know, and
100%.
That's one thing I've told people. Even people know that I support the president. I don't begrudge anybody questioning a decision he makes or whatever it is, because we're all individuals. You may not agree with something he does. I don't hate you for that. You know, that's fine. Everybody's allowed to sort of like have their own room to grow or to disagree on a certain issue or whatever it is. So I think that's the positive of this, is it opened up a lot of people to seeing this differently and not just assuming, oh, there must be another angle where he did something wrong to deserve this. They saw what was there and they go, you know what, this was wrong, you know? And I think that is a change. Do you think that there's been a change? Like, have you seen a difference in how the reaction to his case has been?
Massively. I've seen a lot more people come out and speak against it that I don't think have been as vocal in previous situations. And like you were saying, I think this lockdown has allowed people to see that we're shifting towards a level of comfort with over excessive police force. And I've never had a bad experience with the police. I'm not biased against police in any manner. I obviously don't use that to take away from people who have had negative experiences with police, but I have no negative general feeling towards the police department or police force. But in any capacity of authority, and I mean that from the presidential level to the judicial branch to Congress to police to anywhere there's an imbalance of power, I think people should automatically demand a level of transparency and be skeptic in all behavior and actions. And I think blind trust of anything is bad, especially if there's an imbalance of power, because you can look into situations where specific police departments have been very excessive. And that's how I go into these types of situations. I don't say somebody Black or white has been killed. I say, I just saw somebody use my tax dollars to kill someone. Why? Make it make sense to me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%. That's very well said. You know, transition a little bit here. You're in Vegas, right?
Yes.
So you're in Vegas now. You guys are still shut down. How do you feel about that? And what do you see kind of going on the ground there? And how do you think people there are feeling?
Firstly, it's very weird. It's very scary to see Vegas completely shut down, a city that's lit up 24/7, filled to the max with tourists, completely empty. It's horror movie-like, but Vegas is kind of suffering. Like, continuously, we have our governor Sisolak, who's been kind of going on press runs talking about how supported Nevada is and supported Las Vegas is, and all of these steps that he's making to work us and help us through this. And none of it's really happening on the ground level. From my experience to people that I know, to people that I've just seen having the conversations, we can't afford to be shut down much longer. All of our hotels are out of business at the moment. That's hundreds of thousands of people out of work all at once, backing up unemployment like by months at a time. People just, everybody's suffering. It's like watching it completely collapse. It's insane.
It's like watching a slow motion train wreck. You know, I saw a lot of people made fun of the Las Vegas mayor when she had that interview with Anderson Cooper. And I think that may have hurt the prospects of opening Vegas up. But I think that, you know, she had a very wrong-headed idea of how to go about this. But I do think that we're at that point where we have to open up. Like, this is, and not for any of the reasons she thinks, but just from the pure context of, like, this will cost more lives if we continue to make people go broke and lose everything they ever worked for. I don't think some people recognize how hard some people work to have a small business or to work for themselves or whatever it is to build what they have, and how quickly it can be taken away. You can really draw a direct parallel to socialism, because, like, my family in Cuba, they worked their butts off. They had their own family farm. You know, you'll hear, I've heard this a million times from socialists where they're like, oh, your family must have had slaves. No, my family didn't have slaves. In fact, my family race mixed, which was not popular at the time. And they did not have slaves. They never were, like, in their area of Cuba is very rural. Like, there weren't even slaves in that area. And so the whole idea is crazy in the first place, because, you know, it just, slavery in Cuba was not happening to the extent it happened in the United States. So the time period they're talking about, it doesn't even make sense. They just, socialists in America, you can just assume, know nothing about other countries that are socialist, because they'll excuse anything with some weird sort of thing they've come up with out of their butts. So, you know, but it's sort of similar in that sense, you know, that you see how socialism sort of can take everything they ever worked for so quickly. And I think that's what we're seeing now in this lockdown, is that, like, people have worked 20 years to have their small business, and suddenly the government's just pulling it out from under them and saying, no, you can't have it back, you know?
Closing forever. It's so heartbreaking to witness. Yeah. And I feel like it is the height of American privilege to want to trade capitalism for socialism or communism. You have to have lived a very, very good life to think that there's it doesn't make any sense to me, but that's
you have to be
crazy
totally
to see
blind.
as well.
You have to be totally blind to the people who are eating rats right now in Venezuela to want that, you know?
Yes. It's beyond me. And the other thing that surprises me is people are trying to use the situation to argue about how capitalism has failed us, to which I'm like, no, this situation is proof that the government is failing us, for one. They've completely dropped the ball on many different levels, but capitalism is what would have allowed us to have leeway for something like this to happen and be okay. Whatever happened in the interim of the financial cushion that we would have had, that's a conversation we should be having, because that money has gone somewhere. Something has happened, but it's not a situation of a different economic standpoint or a different structure that would have led us out of this in a more secure way. I don't get that argument, that point of view. And it's also really sad to see how, again, something that should have been easily able to unite us has become political and divisive. Once again, this isn't a situation of one group of people who are, you know, against healthcare workers and don't believe in the CDC and want everybody to go out and die, versus people who love healthcare workers and only care about people's safety. It's a matter of, in my opinion, people who can afford to stay home, be it 3 months, 6 months, 6 years, versus people who are not going to be fine when we hit the 3-4 month mark. There are people who aren't going to be okay. So it's either stay home and absolutely starve, or take your chances and at least make some money and be able to, protect your family and take care of your belongings and eat.
And at the end of the day, we have to be real about the fact that, like, unless you're 65 or older, your chance of surviving this is better than 99.6%. I'll take those chances to be able to live life.
I mean, we're not talking about Ebola here. That's what
if it was Ebola, I'd
here.
stay home. I'm not going to lie. If it was Ebola, I'd stay home, but it's not Ebola. And I think, I didn't begrudge the beginning of this. The first, 2 weeks of it, I was like, okay, you know what? We don't know what this is. It came from China. I was already aware at the time that it came from a lab in China. So I was very sort of, let's say, suspicious of it because, anytime something comes from a lab in China, I think that we need to know more,
Yeah.
And so I was definitely suspicious of it. I thought it was a good idea to keep people home to just see, what was going on. But at a certain point, we knew what we needed to know. And now we still have Democrat governors and Democrats, that are mayors, congressmen, senators who are basically pushing this stay home line because they see it as an avenue to push the socialist ideologies that they believe in at the end of the day. And you know what? It goes further than that because it's not even that they believe in these ideologies. They know they'll fail and they don't even really want to implement them. It's about power. That's like their avenue to power is that. And so that's what we're seeing happen now. But I think that, it was, again, like, a lot of the stuff that they've done is just really poorly executed. And I don't think they thought about how long of a period of time it is between now and November. Like, how are you going to keep people home till November?
Yeah.
I don't think they thought about that. I think they really thought they'd be able to use this to do all mail-in voting, everybody stay home and depend on the government for a check, and have that sort of big government saves you mentality going into November. That is not going to happen. We're super far away from November. And if anything, they're at very high risk of the economy bouncing back. If everybody opens back up, of it bouncing back because the underlying, in market indicators are actually not bad. It's that we artificially shut down the economy. So if things just pop back very quickly, they could actually be in a lot of trouble.
Denisha, what do you think about mail-in ballots? What do you think about that?
I suppose I'm not against it. I feel like in any form of our voting, I guess, practices, there's an issue or a fault that could be had. Like as we witnessed when people were trying to shift to more technological based voting, we were worried about hacking. We were worried about votes being, misconstrued or tampered with. I'm curious actually what the opposition to the mail-in ballots is that people have, because I don't necessarily have one.
I can give it to you because I am not. So the line from the left is that, Republicans must not want everybody to vote. That's not the case. So here's my issue with it, is that we've seen cases where, we have in California, they had like 4 million people. Was it 4 million? I don't want to give the wrong number. It was either 1 or 4 million. So it was one of the two that were, they were no longer active voters. They were still on the voter rolls and they were being sent ballots. So in a case or they were being sent the opportunity to get an absentee ballot. So in theory, if California says, hey, we're sending everybody a mail-in ballot, it would go to all of these people, including in the state of California. When you go to the DMV to get a license and illegal immigrants are allowed to get a license, it automatically registers you to vote. The state of California Secretary of State has already admitted that illegal immigrants have been signed up to vote on accident at the DMV. So when these ballots go out, they're potentially going not only to people who should not be voting because it's illegal for them to vote, but then to addresses where people no longer even live, and gives the opportunity for other people to vote in their name for people who have already moved. So the other issue too is, like, you look at a state like California, they have legal ballot harvesting. So that means that I could go door to door or I could go to an old folks home and they could all get mail-in ballots there at the old folks home. I show up on the same day U.S. Postal Service shows up. I go to their rooms and I say, hey, I'm here to help you vote. And I say, let me help you. Do you want me to help you fill out your ballot? And I help them. I tell them what to vote for and they fill it in. I tell them what, would be good people and stuff. And they sign their ballot. I collect all their ballots and I take them with me. I essentially am able to manipulate all these people and do that. That would be in the best case scenario. in the worst case scenario, some of what we saw last time in the last election in California when they legalized ballot harvesting is you had people going and stealing ballots, filling them out, and then dropping them off. So those are all sort of like some of the starting points of why I have concerns with mail-in ballots. I would love a system where everybody voted, where everybody had sort of like, let's say, easy access to vote, because I also actually don't think everybody should vote, because a lot of people don't care and they don't know the issues and they don't want to vote. So I don't want them to vote if they don't want to. But people who want to vote, I want it to be easy for them. I don't think that mail-in ballots are the answer to that, though, because of how ripe they are for fraud.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I wasn't aware necessarily of the problems that could come along with it. I hadn't heard much about it besides the fact that it was causing a massive uproar. I don't know. It just seems like any way we turn, it's problems that would be solved if people didn't suck.
Yeah.
Which isn't.
That seems to be a major problem and theme in society.
Well, what is the aversion to just getting voter ID? That seems like
that whole conversation drives me crazy. Is like, this is one of those sort of things where the left is guilty of this racism that they don't even realize they perpetuate. And it's sort of the racist, bigotry of low expectations. Like this idea, I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of like the people going around being like, hey, why do you think it is that we can't have voter ID? And they all say these like super racist things about Black people, like, oh, they don't know how to use the internet, or
white liberals at these colleges, like in NYU, and they're like, because they can't get ID. What do you mean they can't get ID?
And then they go around in like Harlem and they're like, hey, do you have an ID? And they're like, yeah, we have to have ID. What are you talking about? This is the most racist idea. I mean, to participate in society as like a functioning member of society, you have to have an ID. So how does that make you feel when people are like, oh no, we can't have voter ID because it's racist?
It's so frustrating. It makes absolutely no sense to me. It's the one thing that I find an issue with in general is when, even if the claims that they were making weren't racist and were even remotely true, you can't just lower the bar of expectations because some people fail to meet them, if that makes any sense. Because then what is the structure of society if this is too difficult and there's no actual discriminatory reason as to why it's too difficult? We can't just say, well, I guess it's too hard. Let's just have no rules. Let's have nothing. Like, we don't want to make it too stressful. No.
Yeah.
But also there's something to be said, and I've noticed this continuously, almost without fail, in any situation where white people or any other race really is offended on behalf of Black people or is speaking specifically for Black people in a way that paints them as if they just are babbling infants who can't do anything for themselves, it always comes out with some sort of problem. Like, there's not people who genuinely see an issue in that is towards African Americans or in African American communities, or any sort of maybe systemic argument that they would make. They go out and attempt to fix or help that community. They don't go out and just make it seem like they are a hero of all heroes, trying to save everybody's day, and that Black people could not survive without their shining knight. Like, it's so strange to me.
It's embarrassing.
It's very embarrassing. It's very belittling. I remember reading conversations about voter ID and just reading the litany of it's racist, it's against Black people, it makes it hard for them to vote. And I'm like, why? I was successfully able to get an ID. What is the process that is stopping other people from getting ID that you claim?
It's crazy. And not only that is that, like, we want voter ID where if somebody is economically disadvantaged and they can't pay for one, they will get one for free. You will get a voter ID for free. So that's the other part of it that doesn't make any sense to me, is like, the barrier to entry here is free. This is not something we're saying you have to pay $50 to get a voter ID. You can get a free voter ID under these proposals. So it just has never made sense to me. But it's just so embarrassing when white liberals do that stuff.
It's so cringeworthy. It's horrible. I hate it with a passion.
It is. And my favorite is like when they do it to me about immigration. I'm like, my mom's an immigrant. My grandparents are immigrants. They all, like, I am Latino, I am Hispanic, and you're trying to tell me I'm racist to other Hispanic people. No, I care about the people who are affected the most, which, when it comes to illegal immigration, a lot of times it's actually, it's Black males. But, it's all of us though, in so many different ways. And so if we don't approach these issues that are sort of within our own purview, then other people try to speak for us and, put words in our mouths in terms of what would be best for us. It's sort of this idea that they know what's best for us. And that's a common theme on the left, is that like, well, I hate you, you're a horrible person, you're a racist, you're a Nazi, but listen to me because I know what's best for you. And I don't understand where they feel like that's an effective argument. Like what part of life that's ever worked.
And it's like, what's best for me, and what's best for me is coincidentally what also benefits you.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely,
well, you saw what like, I think, the Central Park video?
Mm-hmm. Oh.
I think that's a microcosm of white liberalism, which, by the way, that whole thing was a case of two Karens, because number one, the guy saying to her, "You're not going to like what I'm going to do to your dog." That's creepy. It's weird. I wouldn't have even begrudged her, like running away with her dog or whatever it is. Or if she actually felt threatened by it, saying, "Hey, I'm in the park and I feel uncomfortable. This guy tried to feed my dogs and said he's not going to like what he does to them." Fine,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But her response was a million times worse than what he did, because she
could have gotten him killed.
She could have gotten him killed. She went straight to this voice of sounding like, "I'm being chased with a knife. This guy's going to rape me in the park."
Oh my God.
That's what it sounded like. Like if I had only heard the audio, that's what it sounded like. And that's sort of like the white liberal mask falls off, from, it starts with, "Sir, please stop recording me," and ends with, "There's an African-American man. I need help now. I'm in the," she goes to this different place, and
it's like a soap opera performance.
It really, I saw it as sort of like the definition of white liberalism. That's what it feels like.
Horrific. And what you just did is the thing that I like about you guys is you didn't, again, that video came out and it's arguable that both of them are assholes. I don't know why. If you see, like, it easily could have been de-escalated if they just left each other alone. Like, if this lady is not putting her dog on a leash and you want to be petty, call her a name and walk away. I don't know. Call the people who manage the park. I don't know. It's just, it didn't need to continue to escalate. But what was irritating me is that people, again, come out of the woodwork and are like, "Well, they both did something wrong here." And I'm like, they would have both done something wrong if he did what he did and she responded by calling him a name or even calling him a slur or taking out her anger or frustration in a way that is verbal. Then I would have been like, "Yeah, she's an ass, but I get it." If someone comes up to me and is saying things I don't want to hear, I might be like, "Yeah, you're this, and this, get away from me, F off." But because she tried to knowingly, the consequence that could have ensued if the police had only heard the audio of what she did, what she called in saying, knowing how badly that could have ended for him, the fact that she did that is what took it to the next level. It's no longer
and that is why it makes it way worse than what he did. That's why.
I don't think people realize that if there had only been audio of her 911 call and he was not recording, she could have said anything after that. And in the courts, he probably would have been, she could have said, he was going to attempt to rape me. He said he was going to kill me. She could have said anything.
Juries hear an emotional 911 call, and people go to prison over that. So you
couple those two things together. Yes. For people who don't know, people go to prison all the time over a call like that being convincing enough, and then the first-hand account being convincing enough. That happens. And so what she did, he literally,
she should be prosecuted for reporting a false crime.
Oh,
what she did, it is unbelievable.
And what happened. Here's the other thing: is I saw people saying, "Oh, it's so sad that this went too far. Are you happy now? She lost her job." And I'm like, well, okay, let's take a step back. If she had gone through with this, there was only a call. He ends up charged. What do you think happens to him? He would have lost his job. It's the same thing for her. This isn't about Twitter bringing her down and having her lose her job because of Twitter. If she's charged with the false reporting crime that she should be charged with, because I believe there's a felony one in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And if there is, she's going to lose her job anyways. As a byproduct of that, of her bad choice. This is, again, instead of making it a black-white issue, her bad choice is what got her fired. You know, stop making bad choices and you won't have consequences, you know? And I think that's something that, like, I feel like it's so infantile, but we should all carry that from being children. Like, you make bad choices, there's consequences to it. But 100%. So many adults seem to have forgotten that.
People seem to think it's like an entity of cancel culture or somebody saying, boop, you lose your job based on footage on Twitter. And it's not like that. If I was an owner of a company and I saw that video and it was, of course, getting more and more attention, I don't want to be associated with that in any capacity, because people, that makes my company and my brand look terrible. Not to mention, I've also just witnessed someone who has made it very clear they are willing to falsify information to the police to accomplish something regardless.
Absolutely.
No, terrible situation.
And that should be the principle. Yeah.
Right. And it was that is a video evidence of race, you know, like some kind of discrimination. She said it. It literally came out of her mouth. It's not an idea of what happened. We saw it.
Yeah. In that case, you can see the racism. And I think that that's the reason we need to talk about these specific incidents, because the more we can make the general public aware that this is an us versus bad people and bad choices issue versus a black versus white issue, we can have a whole coalition of people of all races ready to be able to denounce bad behaviors.
Right.
And say, these behaviors are not okay. And yes, depending on how bad the thing is, there can be room for redemption for people. You know, like, I'm not saying the lady should never be able to work again in her life. At some point, you know, you would hope she's able to learn her lesson, do some, you know, pay the penalty for what happened, and be able to reintegrate in society at some point. But there's other degrees where you shouldn't reintegrate in society. Like, let's pretend that in this case with Floyd, that the cop does come out to be race motivated. Okay. If we pretended that was the case, he should never be a part of society. I mean, he shouldn't just principally, without race even being in context, you know, just based on what happened. Certain things are not redeemable. Other things are, you know, and I think that's something people lose sight of too quickly with the whole cancel idea, is that, you know, oh, this person's canceled forever, they should never be a part of society. There has to be some room for redemption, but we have to be reasonable.
Yeah, agreed. There's a show called Defending Jacob that's on right now. And I think one really good thing about that show is it makes it very clear how the legal system works, in a sense that very minor things can work against you all at once and make you look very guilty when there's nothing there to refute your claim. And I make that point because there are people saying, can we stop videotaping people we have negative interactions with? And my point is, if that man had not been recording what was going on, she might have gotten away with that.
Yep.
Oh,
we would
totally.
not know. There wouldn't be that outrage. That phone call would have been enough, and it would have been cycled into whatever it turned into.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean,
and it could have been turned into the opposite. She could have said that he said, you know, racist stuff about her, you know, like, you know, it could have gone so many terrible directions had he not videoed. I saw people say that to me too. I was pleasantly surprised in both cases that the reaction in general was one of not just agreement, but outrage that these happened the way that they happened. And I have to say, it made me really happy because, you know, when you do go kind of against the grain and you start talking about something that maybe people within your circles are not talking about, I'm not saying there's not a worry so much as like an unknown. You don't know how people are going to react to it. And I kind of don't care. But, you know, for a lot of people, they do care. And so they're worried about how are people going to react. I was pleasantly surprised to see that everybody was on the same page. And I think in some cases, it just takes somebody saying something to kind of open the door to, hey, you can say something. You don't have to be quiet about this because you're afraid it's going to make it sound like you don't like other police officers. You know,
100%.
You can have both views. You can love law enforcement, think they have a really hard job, and the vast majority do a really good job, while also saying, hey, we need to nip in the bud these terrible situations.
Yeah, like there are people who are on the complete opposite end who say things like, because of this, we should abolish police. And I'm like, wait a second, that's not what I'm co-signing. We've gone too far. And then there are people who say that police are never wrong, that police are completely in the right. And I'm like, things don't have to be such a drastic pendulum. We can look at every single situation as a case-by-case scenario and say, what is the problem here and how do we fix it? And that's what we should be doing.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, why not tack on the animal cruelty charge too? I mean, she needs to do the time for every bad thing. There's consequences for actions, and I think that's what should happen in these individual circumstances is making sure that justice is served, and if it's not, addressing that, specific situations that we see.
Yeah, and I think they set, when justice does come clear and it is a situation that does end up being resolved, it sets the precedent that you can't get away with these types of actions. I think there has to be a certain level of comfort for you to falsify a police report because you could get away with it. And when you don't get away with it and it makes it clear to people you don't get away with it, people are less likely to continue doing nonsense like that in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had a commenter, Shelley Longoria, make a good point. There's good and bad in every profession. And I think that people, you can't expect any profession to have some sanctimonious group of 100% pure people who are they all have the perfect ideology and the perfect, behaviors. And at that point, we're robots, we all have flaws. We all have things that we're not perfect at. And that's part of what makes us human. And it gives us some depth and some, difference with each other that we can sort of mold into something beautiful, and in some cases it's not beautiful, but we're not ever going to be perfect. And I think people need to come to terms with that there's going to be bad people in every profession. And as good people, if you're a good person, I think that we can do some good by calling it out,
Definitely. And I think I try to be really mindful about what situations I speak on and how I speak about them, because it's very easy to get associated with a group who has one ideology and that completely discredit anything you say afterwards. So I get people being very mindful about how they make points and tiptoeing around speaking on certain topics. But I think it's really important that we make it clear that we're not someone trying to choose sides here. We're simply trying to make it so that society is better for everyone involved. Because even these singular situations that appear to only impact one or two groups of people, it trickles down to everybody. If we have a mishandling of escalated situations, or certain people who feel they can get away with certain ridiculous, horrific actions, it's going to impact everyone. It's not just going to be one group of people.
Absolutely. You're right.
I have a final question. Do you think that Joe Biden will be the Democratic candidate in November?
Boy, did the DNC mess that up.
do you think he'll make it to November though? Or are they going to have to replace him? I think they're going to have to replace him. I don't think that he can. I don't think he's going to make it.
They're going to have to replace him if there's even an ounce of common sense left. There was a tweet the other day that the Democrat official Twitter tweeted, and they were like, "It didn't have to be this bad." And I'm like, the lack of self-awareness to even say that is just beyond me. I'm surprised that he is even in the conversation, especially with the fact that he can't even seem to remember where he is. He also said that if you don't vote for him, you're not really a Black person, which I don't even know what that means.
How do you recover from that? I mean, how do you stay in the game?
I don't understand.
How do people continue supporting somebody like that?
I don't get that. That was, I had to, when I first saw that clip, by the way, I thought somebody edited it. I thought that there's no way he said that. He's dumb, but he's not that dumb. He's senile, but he's not that senile. But he is. I mean, it was really, and I don't use I don't use words like that. I don't just label somebody dumb, stupid, or senile. He legitimately is senile. He's legitimately he's losing his mind. And
there's
we've
videos
seen all
of him.
these videos. I don't even like him in general. It's just I actually feel bad for him at this point because this elder abuse, he's just a little puppet talking. I don't like him just based on the fact that he wrote the crime bill and that, he is cool with abortion and wants to pay for it with our tax dollars, but that stuff aside, he's just losing it.
I'm just confused. I'm very confused. I mean, there's footage of him being confronted by potential voters and him being like, hey, and screaming at them and doing all sorts of weird things. And people who are I don't care if he did sexually assault someone, I would vote for him anyway. I'm like, what? And where am I existing? What world is this? What's going on?
It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. That's the best one with all the virtue signaling that goes on that side. That's the best candidate they can come up with. I mean, it's
like,
unbelievable.
honestly, Bernie Sanders would have been a better, stronger candidate for them if they really wanted to see someone who could at least make it to the stage and at least
to compete,
have the conversation.
He can debate. You know, he could have debated. He makes people laugh. You know,
he would have shown up. It like at least there would have been something. But
yeah,
wow.
I mean, they had better options, and I think that's the weird part of this is I almost wonder if the whole Biden thing is a strategy to take him out so that whoever they put has a very short period of time to be vetted and have opposition research dropped on them. And that's that, because I don't understand if he really makes it to November and they actually run him. I think we're going to have gigantic landslide against him by the time we get to that point. I mean, people don't realize Trump's already moving in the polls against him. And there's been almost no attack stuff done on him yet. Okay. When Trump starts airing ads in every suburban area and urban area in America based on Joe Biden's position on crime, his position having to do with mass incarceration, the racist stuff he said, his creepy behavior with kids, when all of those videos are actually aired in suburban cities to people who are not on the internet, and, you know, those areas, Biden is going to sink so low in polls. It's ridiculous. We haven't even gotten close to that point where all of that massive dump of information occurs. When that happens, like, Biden's toast. And so I can't imagine he's going to make it to November. I really can't. They're dumber than I thought they were as a party if he does make it there.
Trump would eviscerate him. It wouldn't even be a close call. And the thing too is, like, it seems as if this information kept surfacing about Biden with these behaviors that weren't sitting well with the public, and he didn't stop. After it became public knowledge that he was smelling little girls' hair and other strange behaviors, he was still doing it. I'm like, who is on your team that's not managing? Where is your publicist? What's going on?
Right.
It's crazy. It's got to be the worst
so
job in the world right now to be his publicist.
Oh, well, did you see his handler, his person, that he shushed and was like, did you see that video where he was like,
yes.
Her away?
I'm like, I don't get it. It's
all right. Are there any more questions on there?
I don't think so, but we definitely have to have you on again, Denisha.
Yeah.
Thanks for sticking with through all the technical difficulties. And
well, now we know for next time you're on, you have to wear headphones.
Headphones. I'm sorry.
Thanks for joining us today.
This was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I know you have to come on again soon. For sure.
Bye.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lisa. Bye. Bye, everybody. Hope you guys have a great day. I do want to say one last thing before Robbie cuts me off here. We welcome, conflicting opinions, and we would love to have, a debate with anybody who, wants to talk about, has a different viewpoint. And we're happy to set that up. So DM us at GrowUp Live Show on Twitter.
The guy who disagreed with us that was saying
but that's an interesting point I'm going to make, is that people come and, disagree or troll or, make these broad term statements with offering no real solutions. But when we repeatedly, in our streams tell people, DM us, let's set up a debate. Let's talk about this issue. Nobody steps up. So I just want to put that out there that, we're not the type of people that want to live in an echo chamber. We want to have productive civil discourse and conversations. We want to grow, we want to stretch, and we want to challenge those other viewpoints. So that our only criteria is that you reach out and be willing to do so. We're not going to go hunt for people to talk with us.
And we can't vet that you're a real person.
Yes, and vet that you're not like a CCP Twitter person. And then the other thing is that you have to be civil. Everybody deserves to have a civil discourse. And if you're just going to engage in ad hominem or become so emotionally, you're not able to have any emotional control like a normal adult having an adult conversation, then we're not going to have that conversation, because it's not going to be productive and it's a waste of everybody's time. So those are the only two requirements: DM us and be a civil human being.
I don't even require you to be a civil human being. I'm happy to
Robbie
embarrass people.
But I do. I have a standard, and I don't yell. I don't
Everybody already knows you have standards. That's why you married me.
Oh
but
my
I,
gosh.
however, I'm open
I'll
to
set
an
up,
argument.
you know what? I'll set up a special like telenovela with Robbie and, you know, somebody that is trolling. So you guys can just like, you know, get some popcorn and just enjoy that. But
see, I'm happy to
I
do
actually
that.
do want to have really productive discussions where, you know, we can learn and grow. And, you know, that's what I value
too.
and I find intellectually stimulating. I don't enjoy talking to somebody that's just
I do too, but I would also like to eviscerate a troll. So I want both, the best of both worlds.
The best of both worlds. All right, well, let's see which one we can get first. How about that?
All right.
Have a great day, y'all. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys. Have a good day.
Bye.